Talking about new highs on Wall Street with Amazon beating Alphabet to the $1,000 punch. Let's bring in today's panel. Liz Peek from the Fiscal Times, Jay Freeman from the Wall Street Journal. He is also a Fox News contributor. And John Tammy from Real Clear Politics. Thanks for joining us. Liz, let me start with you. What do you think of that Amazon number and those tech stocks?
Well, it's all about expected growth. Look, Amazon is selling at an incredibly high multiple of this year's earnings, almost 149 times this year's earnings. But analysts expect over the next 5 years that the growth in the earnings will be about 27%. I challenge you to find many companies where there's a consensus looking for that higher growth rate. By the way, that's considerably higher than Google, and I think the reason is Amazon has still many markets that they don't work in, that they're not involved in, like fashion and other things. It seems like this company can do almost anything, and that's, of course, when you have to become a little concerned that perhaps it's a little ahead of itself.
Yeah, James, are you concerned it's ahead of itself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about the United States, but you look at these tech valuations, Alphabet, Google's parent, is a relatively cheap 34 times earnings, which is very expensive in a normal market. Now, obviously, expectations for growth here. I guess if I'm looking at these two companies, looks to me like Google, Alphabet has a lot more defensible barriers against competitors. So.
Yeah. John, when you look at the broader market, I mean, it all has to do with what people think is going to, or investors especially, think is going to happen to the economy going forward. That's tied into politics. How much do you think Trump is playing in all of this in his presidency?
Well, I think there's a couple things going on. Trump does have majorities, and if, in fact, he leads with tax cuts, that could obviously boost the economy. I think another thing that's potentially at work is that he is not viewed as a traditional politician. And what I mean by that, he may not be able to get as much done in a broad sense after taxes, and markets have historically really enjoyed gridlock. That makes them optimistic. The less Washington does, you're removing a huge barrier to upward stock market growth, simply because when Washington acts a lot, markets don't like it.
All right, well, John was just talking about taxes. Let's talk about the timeline for tax reform. President Trump tweeting, quote, "The massive tax cuts, the reform that I've submitted is moving along in the process very well, actually ahead of schedule, big benefits to all." And the president is putting pressure on Congress, adding, quote, "The U.S. Senate should switch to 51 votes immediately, get health care and tax cuts approved fast and easy. Dems would do it, no doubt." But according to the Wall Street Journal, the Republicans' proposed tax changes are no match for the status quo swamp. And, John, a lot of those in the status quo against tax cuts are Republicans. What do Republicans have against tax cuts?
I have no idea why. I think one of the factors at play is that what the Republicans in the House and Senate want isn't necessarily what Donald Trump wants. My guess is Republicans will ultimately fall in line on this one. What was it that Robert Novak used to say? If Republicans were put on this earth to cut taxes, that's really all they're good at doing. Let's reduce the price placed on work, on investment. If so, markets will respond positively.
Well, so far they're not very good at doing the one thing they can do, according to Novak. James, what about the idea of changing the rules in the Senate? Now, Mitch McConnell has said he won't do it, but Donald Trump is going to push him to do it so that 51 votes is all that would be needed to get the tax cuts. Who's going to win in that battle?
You don't need to change the Senate rules. You can go with the 51-vote strategy. You do a 30-year budget window, which might as well be permanent. You can get a big tax cut that lasts for 30 years, and that gives everybody enough confidence to invest and to react to those lower rates. Wow. So it's right there in front of them. They got to stop talking in Congress about Trump and Russia. Just pass the tax cut.
Hey, look, I agree, yeah. Liz, but what do you think? What's the feasibility of getting a tax cut?
Oh, I think it's a must-do event. And look, whatever it takes to get there, they've got to get there. The problem is they have to come up with revenues. Everybody wants to cut corporate taxes. I think most of the Congress would like to cut individual taxes, but they have to replace them if indeed they do this permanently, which is what they want to do. But James is quite right. They can change the goalposts. There's all kinds of shenanigans they can do. If they head into 2018 election cycle with no indication that the tax cuts are on the table, they're in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the president is back from his trip abroad and feels no better about Germany, tweeting, quote, "We have a massive trade deficit with Germany, plus they pay far less than they should on NATO and military. Very bad for the U.S. This will change." James, so he makes this comment, then she says, you know, oh, we're going to have to rely on ourselves, you know, or something like that. And then you read all the articles and they say that this is sending shock waves through Washington, the back and forth between them. James, there's absolutely nothing new about this. Why is this sending shock waves that he feels like Germany isn't pulling their weight?
Well, she's got an election she's trying to win in Germany this fall, so I think that's what a lot of her message is about. As far as Donald Trump, I think he's a little confused on the trade deficit argument, but I think he's right on target. There is no reason that Germany, the most powerful economy in Europe, shouldn't pay a reasonable amount for its own defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Liz, what do you think?
Oh, and I think he's not totally wrong on trade. I mean, Germany has a huge trade surplus. It's 1.5 times the trade surplus with the world that China has, and China's economy is 3 times bigger. The reason is they have a cheap euro, and the reason they have a cheap euro is because so much of the EU is under fiscal pressure. So Trump isn't totally wrong. The problem is there's no easy fix to this, and it's not something that Germany is at all eager to address. But look, Angela Merkel, as James said, is running for re-election. She's under the gun because of all the refugees she's brought into the country. Manchester happened while he was abroad, and that puts more pressure on Merkel. So I'm not creating a straw man in President Trump is very beneficial to Angela Merkel right now. It brings the country together. It's us versus him. You know, that's very convenient for her.
Yeah, and climate change is another one of those issues where they're looking for a straw man. And President Trump is reportedly ready to announce whether or not he's going to be pulling out of the so-called Paris Accord on climate change. John Tamny is hoping he'll be announcing our exit from the accord. He wrote a terrific piece about this in Real Clear Markets. You can look at it online. Why, John? Why should we withdraw from it?
Well, we should withdraw from it because it's an economy-sapping concept whereby we would allow basically a global treaty to reduce the normal operations of the marketplace. But the other thing is why on earth would Trump enter in any kind of treaty with Europeans or be pressured by them? If you look at NATO, they have not lived up to their pledges to fund NATO. The U.S. has basically funded that, the majority of that, to its economic detriment. You look at the treaties that Europeans enter among themselves, the Maastricht Treaty, they have not abided that. Why would Trump give the U.S. credibility to a treaty that is inimical to our economic progress? I don't get it.
And John, I want to focus with you on this because you make a statement which is pretty profound that, in fact, what the Paris Accord does is it assumes that economic progress and climate change are at loggerheads. That is, you can't have economic progress without hurting the environment, to which you say what?
Well, that's absurd. Let's remember that oil is of the earth. Coal is of the earth. So I don't see how consumption of that which comes from the earth could actually weaken it or threaten the planet. Furthermore, if you look at economic progress, what it's historically meant around the world is that the more countries progress economically, the less damage they do to the environment, simply because people
there is
who
a
have
bell curve. You're poor. At first, there's more damage to the environment. Then they have enough disposable wealth to work on helping the environment, and that's when it comes down a lot. Go ahead.
Yes, that's what, as wealth grows, people have time to care about the environment.
Right.
There are tons of Sierra Club chapters in the United States. I defy anyone on this panel to find one that's in Bangladesh. They don't exist where there's poverty. You have to have wealth first.
All right. Thanks to all of you. We wanted to focus on John because he wrote that great piece, but we'll see you all here in just a couple of days. Thank you, Melissa.